Welcome to today's math lesson. This is the second video of how to make a histogram from some data. The first thing you have to do is make a frequency table. The data we have in front of us here is life expectancy. So when you make a histogram, you want to know how many times does a particular piece of data or data within a particular width occur. So we look at this data, and unlike the first lesson, we have decimals here. Lots of decimals, only really 2 integer values. So in the first example, we just made a category for each piece of data that occurred. 1 win, 2 wins, 3 wins. We don't want to do that here because we'd have to do 81.3, 77.9, and 79.6, and all these decimals, and it would be a very long, wide graph. It's more convenient to group these into what we call classes. And for this chart, the classes that make sense to begin with, at least, are classes of 1 year. So let's look at our lowest data point here is looks like a 74.2. So let's make our data 74.0 to 74.9. Our class widths are going to be a width of 1. And the way we determine that is, so we have a lower bound, and for this next to 75.0 minus 75.9. The lower bound is 75 of this class. The upper bound is 75.9. You determine the class width by subtracting a lower bound minus a lower bound. So this gives you a width of 1. So this introduces the idea of making classes or it's kind of like categories, only they're numerical. So then after 75 to 75.9, I would do 76.0 to 76.9, 77.0 to 77.9, 78.0. And I make my classes, and notice I'm using 1 decimal place because there's 1 decimal place in the data. 78.9. 79.0 to 79.9, 79, that looks like a 9, 9.9. Looking at the data, it looks like I have to go, the highest one is 81.3, so I have to go 80.0 to 80.9, 81.0 to 81.9, and I think that covers all my data. So now I'm going to count how many I have in each of these classes. And sometimes, especially when you have a lot of data, this isn't too bad with this amount. When you have a lot of data, sometimes it's handy to make tally marks in each class first and then turn that to a number. So this first data point here, 81.3, will be in this last class. 79.6 is here, so I make a tally mark. I'm going to count. Use this to 77.9 will be here. 82 will be, oops, I didn't do 82. I have to make one more class, so that's okay. I go back and I do 82.0 to 82.9, and then, so I've got that 82 is in there. 80.3 will be in here. 78.3 will be in here. 80.9 will be in here. 74.2 will be in here. And 77 will be in here. So what I see is in this first class, and I'll write this in a different font, I have 1, then the second one I have 0, then I have 0 again, and I have 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1. And depending on how widely spread the data is, this isn't too bad. It's not even spread out more than 10. You might have grouped it into chunks of 5 years, from 70 to 74.9, from 75 to 79.9, from 80 to 85.9, but that doesn't make too much sense here because there's only 10 years between all the data. The range of the data is less than 10, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So now I make a histogram for that. And in order to make a histogram for that, I need to make a graph. So in order to make my graph, I need a y-axis. It's going to be the number of times this x-axis data point occurred. So this is the life expectancy in years. And this is the frequency on the right. That's always the frequency in a histogram. So we make this is a frequency table. We call this a frequency table. And there are ways, so when you use a frequency table, you actually lose the information about the actual data. I don't know that these two data points here were 77.9 and 77 anymore, but there are ways we can use the midpoint of the class to estimate what the mean would have been and things like that. But for now, we're just looking at how do we represent this as a graph. So 74 to 74.9. So I'm going to have that be my first one. This is my 74 to 74.9. Sometimes you could just label it. I can't really fit the labels in here. 75 to 75.9, 76 to 76.9, 77. So in between. So this is 74 to 74.9. So you could say this is 74. And right here, this is 75. It's a little hard for me to write that. That'll be 76, 77. I'll label the 78. 79. 80, I'll just label every other one. 81, 82. So that's the beginning of that, and this would be 83 over here. So this begins at 74 on the left. And sometimes you label the middle. That doesn't look very good. Let me fix that. Sometimes you label the end. There are multiple ways to do it. Your teacher will give you a preference, I'm sure. So here, this was a 74 at the beginning. All right, so now I go back to my frequency table. From 74 to 75, essentially, 74.9, I only had a height of 1. So I'm going to fill that in a different color. Height of 1, right there. I had nothing from 75 to 76, nothing from 76 to 77. I had 2 from 77 to 78, and that's 78, so that would be 77, so I go up to a height of 2. And I might have spaced this out more since the data really only goes to 2. I might have made 1 4 squares instead of 2. I'm just trying to get you the basic idea of how you proceed to make the frequency table and then get a chart. 78 to 79. That's 78. 80's over there. That's 79 there. 78 to 79 was a 1. 79 to 80 was a 1. 80 to 89 was 80 to 81 was a 2. 80.9, I should have said. A little higher. And 81 to 89 was a 1, so I'm back to 81.9 was a 1, and 82 to 82.9 was also a 1. So this gives you some idea of the shape. It's not quite uniformly shaped, but that is how you create a frequency table from data and then turn it to a graph. It would have been better if I spread these bars out more. If I made a 1 be like 4 squares, and then a 2 would be 8 squares, and you'd see the differences better. But that's just the basic idea of what you do. So email me your questions, and I'll see you next time.